What if I told you some spirits never left their graves, and tonight they might be watching you? If you love ghost stories, hit subscribe, tap like, and share this video so we can bring you even more terrifying tales. Subscribe, like, share to keep the ghosts coming. There are places in this world where the silence feels older than time. Places where even the snow dares not fall too loudly, and the wind carries more than cold, it carries memory. Deep in the birch forests of northern Russia, beneath skies of endless grey, there lies such a place, forgotten by maps and avoided by locals. It has no name that still lives in speech. Yet once, a century ago, they called it the village of birches, and it was there that a man named Alexei Morozov carved the first and last Matryoshka of souls. The story of the haunted doll begins, as most terrible stories do, with love. Alexei was a woodcarver of rare talent. His dolls were said to breathe with expression. His saints wept with the sadness of mankind. His wife Katerina and his two daughters, Anya and Daria, filled his world with laughter and the smell of pine resin. But when the revolution came in 1918, laughter turned to screams. The soldiers came in the night. They said Katerina's brother had hidden gold from the Tsar's treasury. They took her and the girls for questioning. Only Alexei remained, kneeling in the snow with hands red from carving, and from something else. When the sun rose, he found them, frozen near the forest edge, eyes open, mouths filled with snow. After that, the villagers said he went mad. For months, the sound of hammer and chisel echoed from his workshop long after midnight. The light of his lantern flickered through the frosted windows like a dying star. He stopped attending mass. He stopped speaking. And then one morning, he emerged hollow-eyed, trembling, but smiling. In his hands, he carried a wooden doll. At first glance, it was a Matryoshka like any other woman in a red sarafan, her painted face serene. But her eyes were not painted like the rest. They were almost alive. Some swore they reflected light, even in darkness. He called her Matryoshka Dukova, the spirit mother. Inside her were 4 smaller dolls, each carved with intricate precision. The smallest, he said, was Daria, his youngest. He placed the doll on the church altar that evening and prayed. When the priest tried to move it the next morning, the doll was gone. Alexei was found a week later in his workshop, seated before his carving table. His body was rigid, face twisted into a smile, and his fingernails were splintered to the bone as if he had clawed something wooden before death. The doll was never found. Decades passed. Wars came and went, leaving villages empty and memories buried. Only the legend remained, a story mothers told children to keep them from wandering into the forest. But stories have strange ways of surviving. In 1948, an ethnographic exhibition in Moscow displayed artifacts of old Russia. Among lacquered boxes and painted icons stood a Matryoshka doll donated anonymously. No one knew its origin. The catalogue simply read, "Early 20th century nesting doll, region unknown." During the exhibition's second week, visitors began to complain. They said the doll's expression changed depending on who looked at it. One claimed she smiled, another swore she frowned. A janitor reported hearing laughter when he locked up the hall at night. The exhibit closed early. The doll was moved to the basement archives of the Institute of Folk Heritage. That's where it earned its true name, the Yaroslavl object. The first file about it is dated May 12, 1953. The handwriting is clinical. Detached, Object 1 to be retrieved from exhibition storage. Paint layers appear to have expanded. Eyes no longer consistent with initial photo documentation. Suggest containment under controlled conditions. 2 days later, the handwriting changes, trembling, smudged ink, knocking sounds recorded within containment box. Rhythmic pattern, 5 taps, approximately every 30 minutes. Recommend isolation. After that, the notes stopped. But the following week, the night guard assigned to the basement, Nikolai Petrov, was found dead. No signs of violence, no heart attack. Autopsy revealed collapsed lungs as if the air had been sucked out of him. The film reel from the security camera showed only flickering light, shadows moving without source, and a faint reflection to eyes staring directly at the lens. When the reel was reviewed again the next morning, it had melted inside the projector. For decades, the doll lay hidden in a sealed crate. Only one photograph survived, preserved by a curator who later defected to Germany. In the image, the Matryoshka appears harmless, yet, if you stare long enough, something seems wrong with the perspective as though her pupils shift slightly toward you, adjusting, watching. When the Soviet Union fell, the archives reopened. The doll was rediscovered by Dr. Alina Korolova, an ambitious historian fascinated by folk mysticism. She was 34, brilliant, and skeptical of superstition. Her diary, found years later, begins logically, like any academic field report. Object 1-B exhibits strong craftsmanship, birchwood body, layered with ochre pigment, paint intact despite age, mild odor of resin, slight vibration detectable under tactile pressure, possibly from environmental changes. 3 entries later, the tone shifts. I felt warmth from within the wood, a pulse. I cannot explain it. Another week passes. Her handwriting grows erratic. The faces inside differ from my photographs. The smallest one, its eyes are no longer closed. They are open now, looking at me. The final entry is short, scribbled across the page in black ink. It knows my name. No trace of Dr. Korolova was ever found. The cabin where she worked was abandoned. The only evidence of her presence, a recorder still running, filled with static. Beneath the hiss, faintly, the sound of wood creaking open. And then a whisper, "Yaduma, I am home." For years, these files sat ignored in a government warehouse, sealed in a folder marked "Do not reopen." Most who encountered the reports dismissed them as hysteria, Soviet ghost story, a remnant of paranoia. Until the winter of 2011, a collector from St. Petersburg purchased a crate of miscellaneous ethnographic items from a decommissioned storage site. Among them was a wooden doll wrapped in rotting cloth. He posted about it on an obscure occult forum, describing its detail and age. He seemed proud of his find at first. Weeks later, his posts changed. The smallest one has begun to move slightly each night. I can hear tapping from the cabinet. When I sleep, I dream of a girl standing in snow. Her eyes are carved of wood. She keeps asking me to open up. The final post came at 3:42 a.m. The 5th doll isn't inside anymore. She's behind me. He was never seen again. You might ask why anyone would continue to seek this thing. Curiosity, perhaps. The human hunger for forbidden truth, or maybe something deeper. Something the doll calls from within the minds of those who see it. That's what brought me here. I never believed in curses. My field is historical reconstruction, documenting lost artifacts, not hunting ghosts. But when I found the file marked Yaroslavl object in the digital archive of the old Soviet Institute, I felt a pull, an irrational need to see it with my own eyes. Perhaps it was fate. Perhaps it was the doll choosing me. In early December, I traveled north to The landscape felt frozen in time, abandoned churches, half buried in snow, trees bending beneath the weight of centuries. Local villagers avoided conversation. When I asked about the Matryoshka, most crossed themselves silently. One old woman spat into the snow and muttered, "The spirit mother still walks." That night, I found the warehouse an iron skeleton of Soviet decay. My lantern flickered as I stepped inside. Dust hung in the air like smoke. Rows of wooden crates lined the walls. Their numbers faded, but one crate bore a fresh mark, a red star, and beneath it, faint Cyrillic letters, 12-B. My breath caught. I ran my hand along the edge. The wood was cold, too cold. I pried it open carefully. Inside lay the Matryoshka. Even in dim light, her presence felt alive. The paint, though cracked, retained an unnatural sheen. Her eyes, those perfect circles, seemed to glimmer faintly as my light passed over them. I told myself it was reflection. Then I heard it. Knock. Soft. From within. I froze. The sound came again. 5 knocks. Slow. Deliberate. I told myself it was wood shifting in the cold. I closed the crate and sealed it again. But as I turned to leave, a voice so faint it might have been the wind brushed my ear. Otkroy menya. Open me. I fled into the night. I brought the recordings, photos, and diary entries back to Moscow. Experts dismissed them as hoaxes. But deep down, I know what I heard, what I felt, and I know this. The doll still exists, somewhere in Russia, beneath layers of wood and blood. The spirit inside the Matryoshka waits, watching, listening. They say the smallest doll was carved last, from the coffin of Alexei's youngest daughter, that it contains her breath, her final sigh frozen in lacquer. And when the 5th doll opens again, she will no longer need wood to live. She will need a body. They say in every layer of the Matryoshka there is a story, and in every story, a soul. But no one ever asks, what happens when one of those souls refuses to stay asleep? For centuries, the Russian countryside has whispered about dolls that breathe between worlds. But in one remote village, a place swallowed by snow and time, the whispers became screams. It began on the third night, after Katerina Ivanova brought the doll home. The candlelight trembled, though there was no wind. The stove burned low, and the silence of the Siberian steppe pressed heavily against the wooden walls of her cottage. She had placed the Matryoshka on the mantle, just above the family's icons, where saints and spirits shared uneasy company. And that was when the knocking began. 3 slow raps from inside the doll, so faint, at first, that she thought it was the wood settling in the cold. But then, it came again. Knock, ... knock, Katerina froze, her knitting needle slipping from her fingers. Her husband, Mikhail, was away on a logging route. Her daughter, little Anya, was asleep. The only light came from the embers flickering in the stove's heart, and still, the sound continued. She approached the mantle, her breath fogging in the air, and the faintest voice, a whisper like breath through old paper, brushed her ear. Let me out, ... Her knees buckled. The candle went out. When dawn came, Katerina told no one what she had heard. In these villages, people live by superstition, and to speak of the dead was to invite them closer. But silence, as the old priest said, is a door ghosts can walk through. That morning, she found the Matryoshka's smallest doll lying on the table, though she swore she had sealed it inside the largest one. Its painted face, once bright and delicate, now seemed smeared, as though the eyes had shifted ever so slightly, and in the grain of the wood, beneath the layers of lacquer, a faint image had appeared, a hand pressed outward from inside. We do not know precisely where this doll came from. Some claim it was carved in the 19th century by a craftsman from Sergiev Posad, the spiritual heart of Russia. Others whisper it was created in a monastery that fell into ruin after a fire, where monks once sealed tormented souls into wooden relics to contain their suffering. Whatever the truth, the Matryoshka was not made for children. It was made as a vessel, a nesting tomb. Days passed, and with each day, Katerina felt the house colder, not in temperature, but in spirit. The fire burned hot, but her bones shivered. The sound of wooden creaking now followed her even outside. Sometimes she'd find small footprints in the frost, childlike, but leading nowhere. Little Anya began to talk to the doll. At first, her mother thought it was innocent play, until one morning, the child said, "Her name is Marfa. She says she used to be alive." Katerina's heart froze. Marfa was her grandmother's name, a woman who had died in childbirth decades before Anya was born. And the doll had been found in Marfa's old chest, sealed beneath the floorboards of their ancestral home. In paranormal studies, there is a phenomenon known as the residual echo, where strong emotions, especially pain or grief, imprint themselves on physical objects. But what if the object is built to contain those echoes? What if every layer of wood and paint is a barrier, a coffin within a coffin, each holding a piece of something that should never have been fragmented? The Matryoshka, when examined by modern scholars, has been called a metaphor for the soul, the outer self hiding countless inner selves. But in this story, it became literal. Every layer of the doll was said to hold part of a woman's essence, her laughter, her memory, her sorrow, and finally, her rage. That winter, the Ivanova family changed. Katerina stopped eating. She heard her name whispered in the night. The neighbors said they saw a woman in white standing in the window of the cottage, though they knew Mikhail was still away, and Katerina was alone with her daughter. Then, on the night of the winter solstice, the village was awoken by screams. The snowstorm outside howled like wolves. The door of the Ivanova home had burst open, slamming against the walls. When the neighbors arrived, they found Katerina kneeling in the snow, her hands black with soot and blood, her hair frozen to her face. She kept repeating one thing: "She's out. She's out." ... The doll was gone. Only a circle of ash remained on the mantle, shaped like the petals of a flower. Anya was found alive but silent, sitting in the corner of her room clutching one of the middle-sized dolls. She would not speak for months. When the priest came to bless the home, he reported that the air was so heavy it felt like breathing through a grave. He later refused to return, claiming that the icon of the Virgin in the Ivanova home had turned its face to the wall during the prayer. As the story spread, others began to come forward. Families from nearby towns claimed to have owned similar dolls, each carved in an old style not seen in modern workshops, and each carrying a strange curse. One farmer from Yaroslav said his grandmother's Matryoshka bled when broken. A collector in Moscow reported hearing lullabies in Old Church Slavonic echoing from her display cabinet, and a traveler from Novgorod spoke of a dream, a forest where dozens of wooden dolls hung from the branches, each whispering in a different woman's voice. A pattern began to emerge. Each haunted doll had been created in the same period, late 1800s to early 1900s, a time of political unrest, war, and spiritual experimentation in Russia. During this era, a sect known as the Order of Nested Souls was rumored to have formed among icon painters and woodcarvers. Their belief that through art a human soul could be preserved, divided, even to achieve immortality. They would take the spirit of the dying and perform a ritual known as the layering. The dying person's final breath would be captured through sacred incantations, and their essence sealed layer by layer into a carved doll. The outermost form represented their earthly self, the innermost, their spirit. Between them, the layers of memory, grief, and longing. But if even one part was carved imperfectly, the soul could fracture, and what returned was not a human echo, but something hungering for wholeness. Investigators who later examined the Ivanova home described the walls as pulsing, as if something beneath the surface still breathed. In one of the remaining dolls, they found microscopic traces of organic matter embedded in the wood grain. Not paint, not dust, but skin. The doll, it seemed, had not merely held the memory of a woman, it had consumed part of her. Years later, the Ivanova house was abandoned. The doll resurfaced at an antique auction in St. Petersburg, catalogued as an original 19th century Matryoshka of unknown origin. It was purchased by a collector named Sergei Antonov, who died 2 weeks later of unexplained cardiac failure. His wife reported that in the hours before his death, Sergei had been obsessively opening and closing the doll, muttering that there are too many inside now. When police recovered the item, they noted an addition, a new, smallest layer, unpainted, unfinished, with no visible seam. They tried to open it. It would not open, it would not break. And yet, if you pressed your ear against it, you could hear something, breathing. The Matryoshka, they say, was designed to symbolize motherhood, the endless cycle of life within life. But in this story, it became something else, a womb of spirits, a nesting of grief and vengeance. And now, no one knows how many souls are truly inside. The haunting of the Matryoshka did not end with Katerina. In the years that followed, others would encounter the same doll, each drawn to it by forces they could not explain. And with every new owner, it seemed to grow heavier, as if it carried more than just wood and paint, as if it carried the memory of every scream, every fear, every prayer unanswered. What began as an artifact of art, had become an organism of sorrow, and in the shadows of Russia's long winters, something ancient had awakened, something that would never sleep again. In the decades that followed the Ivanova tragedy, the haunted Matryoshka vanished and reappeared like a ghost in the archives of collectors, museums, and forgotten estates. Its journey, traced only through fragments of letters, police records, and the testimonies of those who didn't live long enough to finish their sentences, reads less like history and more like a haunting that learned how to move. It did not remain in one place. It traveled. And with each new pair of hands that touched it, it left behind one thing, a mark, invisible but permanent, on the soul of its keeper. The first documented resurgence came in 1954, at the height of Soviet atheism, when the very mention of haunting was dismissed as peasant superstition. A museum curator in Moscow, Irina discovered the doll in a confiscated collection of pre-revolutionary religious art. She catalogued it without thought, noting only wooden nesting doll, 7 layers, dark lacquer, faint traces of ash beneath paint, origin uncertain. But within days, the staff began to report disturbances. Footsteps echoed in the archive basement, though no one was below. Cold drafts swept through sealed rooms. Documents went missing, only to reappear folded neatly inside the display case that held the Matryoshka. Then, on the 12th day, a guard found Irina's office door locked from within. When they broke it open, she was slumped over her desk, the smallest of the dolls clenched tightly in her hand. Her eyes were wide open, but her pupils were gone, milky, white. UNSEEING. The autopsy concluded massive cerebral hemorrhage, but her last journal entry told a different story. The doll, it remembers, It remembers what was done to her. At that point, the museum sealed the object in a wooden crate and stored it deep beneath the archives of the Pushkin Museum of Fine Arts, labeled only item 331. No one touched it for nearly 30 years. But curses do not die, they wait. And when the Soviet Union began to fracture in the 1980s, when archives opened and forgotten relics were unearthed, the Matryoshka emerged again. In 1987, a young ethnographer named Dr. Pavel Orlov became fascinated with legends of haunted icons. His mission, to trace the psychological origins of Russia's ghost folklore and to debunk the mythology of possession. When he discovered references to it in Trzenci, he requested access. The museum denied him twice. On the third request, he threatened to publish an article claiming the institution was suppressing evidence of supernatural phenomena. 2 days later, he was granted permission. In his field notes, recovered after his death, Orlov wrote, "It is heavier than wood should be. When I lift it, I feel as though I am carrying a body, not a metaphorical one, a real one. My arms ache, my heart races, and sometimes it whispers." He began recording his sessions. The first 2 tapes were routine, describing carvings, paint analysis, and surface readings. The third tape began with the sound of slow breathing, not his, and then a woman's voice, faint, crackling through the static. "Pavel, you opened the wrong one." The recording ends there. When museum staff entered the archive the next morning, they found Orlov on the floor beside the open crate. Every doll was unstacked, lined neatly in a circle around him. But there were 8, not 7. No one could explain the extra layer, smaller, smoother, unpainted. Inside that smallest shell, when opened, they found a tooth, human, female. Experts would later speculate that the Matryoshka was not simply a vessel of one soul, but a gathering place for many, each new death bound to it, each new obsession feeding it, adding another layer to its prison. Every time someone studied the doll, they unknowingly joined its story. The spirit inside, whatever it was, seemed to grow more intelligent, more self-aware, feeding on attention, belief, and fear. It was no longer content to be an artifact. It wanted acknowledgement. Scene transition. The low wind of the Russian steppe fades in. A crow caws once. After Orlov's death, the museum destroyed all official documentation of item 331. Rumors spread in the black market for occult artifacts, whispers of a living one that feeds on memory. By 1992, following the fall of the USSR, a British collector named Jonathan Crowe purchased the doll through a private intermediary. He was an anthropologist, fascinated by Slavic death rituals. He shipped it to his home near Bath, England, where he intended to feature it in a book about the psychology of possession in folk art. For months, his letters to colleagues became increasingly erratic. He claimed the doll was changing color, that its surface seemed to pulse when exposed to candlelight, that he could hear music when he touched it, lullabies sung in a language he didn't know. His final letter read, "It is not Russian. It is older. It remembers before Russia, and now it remembers me." He disappeared 1 week later. When police entered his home, the fireplace was still burning. On the mantel, the doll sat open. The inner layers were blackened with soot, except for the smallest one, which was bright red, as if freshly painted. There were no signs of forced entry, but on the wall, above the mantel, carved in Russian Cyrillic, were the words, "I am inside." Those who have studied cursed objects know a pattern when they see one. The Matryoshka had become a vessel not only for one woman's suffering, but for every soul who had tried to uncover her secret. It was no longer just haunted. It had become an ecosystem of spirits, layered and interlocked, like wood within wood, grief within grief, and each layer had learned something new from its victim's speech. Movement, cunning, hunger. By the early 2000s, the doll resurfaced again, this time in the hands of a documentary filmmaker, Yelena Morozov, whose life's work was to explore post-Soviet folklore. She believed the stories surrounding the Matryoshka could be the key to understanding collective trauma, the ghost that lives inside a nation's memory. In her footage, later found partially burned, Yelena documented the process of interviewing descendants of the Ivanova family. One elderly woman, Anya's granddaughter, described strange recurring dreams, a woman in white, with a cracked wooden face, standing in a birch forest. She opens her chest and there are smaller women inside, each crying, each calling my name. Yelena recorded everything. Her notes detail multiple attempts to locate the doll. On the last page, She wrote, "It's calling me. It wants to finish the story." The footage recovered from her final expedition in 2008 is grainy, distorted, yet undeniable. It shows her in a candlelit cottage somewhere near Lake Ladoga, the Matryoshka resting before her, her voice trembling but entranced. She was buried alive, not in earth, but in wood. Then, the light flickers. A shadow moves not behind her, but within her reflection. The last frame freezes on her face, her eyes pitch black, like the hollow core of a doll. The screen cuts to static dot. No one ever found Yelena's body, but weeks later, a fisherman discovered a bundle floating near the shore, wrapped in burlap and twine. Inside a set of wooden dolls, waterlogged yet strangely intact, and within the smallest one, a strip of film. The single frame, Yelena, smiling, or something that looked like her. It is said that the Matryoshka is more than a cursed object. It is a mirror, reflecting the infinite recursion of suffering that humanity buries under layers of beauty and tradition. Each layer carved, painted, and sealed by human hands, until what is human becomes indistinguishable from what is damned. The spirit inside is not just a ghost, it is remembrance itself, the memory of death refusing to be forgotten. And as investigators pieced together its path from rural Russia to modern Europe, they discovered something far more terrifying. The doll was not unique dot across the world, hidden in collections and private vaults, were similar objects, all bearing the same signature. A small mark carved beneath the base of the outermost layer, a triangle inside a circle, encircled by faint words in Latin, corpus in corpus, body within body. It was a mark of the order of nested souls. The haunting of the Matryoshka was not an isolated curse. It was one of many dot, and if the order's ritual was true, every doll was not merely symbolic, it was a seed, a soul awaiting reunion, which raises a question that no scholar has dared to ask aloud. If the Matryoshka represents life within life, soul within soul, what happens when the last layer is opened? Does it end the curse, or set it free? They say that deep in the archives of the State Historical Museum, there remains a sealed crate, labeled "Do Not Open." Its contents are unrecorded, its location restricted, but night guards have reported hearing soft tapping from inside. 3 knocks, always 3, knock knock, knock dot, and sometimes, when the lights go out, a lullaby drifts through the corridors, a woman's voice, distant yet intimate, singing to something small, something inside. The story of the haunted Matryoshka is not just about death. It is about memory, the kind that refuses to stay buried. Each person who encountered it believed they could control it, understand it, or contain it, but the doll has no need for belief. It has patience. It waits for hands, warm, living hands, to lift it once more. And when that happens, when someone dares to peel back its layers, to seek what else. In every legend, there comes a point when truth and nightmare become the same thing, when history no longer explains, and faith no longer protects. For the Matryoshka, the Russian doll that should never have been carved, that moment arrived quietly, as if the world itself forgot to breathe. By the end of the 2010s, no one could say where the doll truly was. Some claimed it remained in a government vault, others believed it was smuggled into a private occult collection in Germany. But there was another theory, whispered by those who had studied every cursed trace it left behind, that the doll had never stayed in one place at all, that it moved, carried not by hands, but by remembrance, that every retelling of its story was another layer carved upon it, and every listener became one of its shells. Asterisk, the story might have ended there, an unsolved legend, another name in the archives of folklore. But in 2021, a series of strange events brought it back into the light. A documentary production company from St. Petersburg, Fazdo Media, began working on a film called Haunted Mother Russia. The final episode was to center on the ghost inside the Matryoshka. Their lead investigator, Lydia Korolenko, had spent months tracking the doll's trail, following fragments of evidence left behind by Yelena Morozov, the missing filmmaker from 2008. In an interview she gave before her disappearance, Lydia said, "The Matryoshka is not haunted by a ghost. It is the ghost, the physical form of something that cannot die, and I think it's calling for its mother." Those were her last recorded words. Asterisk, 3 months later, her production crew vanished in Karelia while filming at the ruins of an old monastery. Only their footage was recovered. What it showed defied explanation. The camera moves through the decaying cloister, frost glimmering on stone, the silence absolute. Then, a whisper, a woman's lullaby, faint but rhythmic. The camera pans right, and there, half buried in snow, stands a wooden figure. The Matryoshka dot. It looks newly made. Its paint, crimson, gold, immaculate, seems wet. As the lens moves closer, a child's voice murmurs in Russian. She's waiting to be opened. The screen flickers, static distorts the image, and for a single frame, something impossible. The face painted on the doll moves. The lips part, and within them, a smaller face opens its eyes. The footage ends there. Asterisk. When the authorities arrived, they found no human remains, only footprints circling the courtyard in a perfect spiral. 5 layers of footprints, decreasing in size until they vanished entirely at the center. And in that final impression, pressed into the snow, a single word carved deep. Inside. Asterisk. Over the following months, paranormal researchers from across Europe tried to locate the doll again, but it was gone. Not stolen, not hidden. Gone. Until a small package arrived at the Museum of Ethnography in St. Petersburg, addressed anonymously, containing a single nesting doll of pale birch wood. It bore no paint, no pattern, only a faint circular brand at its base. Corpus in corpus. Inside were not smaller dolls, but ashes. Lab analysis identified traces of 5 individuals, including one matched to Lydia Korolenko. Asterisk. It seemed, had begun to remake itself, not as art, but as something alive, consuming those who sought it, layering their remains within its growing body. Every spirit it touched, every soul it remembered, became another curve, another hollow, another echo. It was no longer an artifact, it had evolved into an organism of grief. The haunted object had become a system, and in that system, we were the material. Asterisk. Experts in Russian folklore often speak of the Matryoshka, the wet circle, a curse that repeats itself through generations, binding families and their descendants. But what if that circle is not blood, but memory? What if the Matryoshka was never meant to contain a soul, but to store remembrance, to hold history itself like a seed that never rots? In that case, the doll is not cursed. It is awake, and the longer we speak of it, the more it grows. Asterisk. Let us return to the beginning. A mother, a child, a gift carved from wood, given in love. The original craftsman's name has long been lost, but legend says he made the doll for his dying wife, a woman who had miscarried 7 times. In his despair, he carved a mother holding children within her, each smaller than the last, believing that, if her spirit lived within the wood, she would never lose them again. But when she died, something else entered instead. Not love, not peace, but the echo of every child she never held. Grief that deep does not die, it multiplies. Asterisk. And so the Matryoshka became the perfect vessel. Each layer, a wound disguised as beauty. Each smile, a scream painted shut. Each body, another tomb. Those who touched it didn't merely awaken her spirit, they completed her. Each death, each obsession, each story told, another circle closed, another doll within. And when Lydia's team vanished, and their ashes returned inside the new shell, it marked something unprecedented. The ghost had learned to build itself. Asterisk. Investigators, reviewing the final footage, noticed something strange in the audio waveform. Hidden in the static of the last frame was a pattern. 7 rhythmic pulses, identical to the knocking heard in Katerina Ivanova's home over a century before. When slowed down, the pattern formed a phrase in archaic Russian. The mother remembers. Not a mother. The mother. The spirit within the Matryoshka had never been singular. It was maternal, collective, the embodiment of countless women whose grief had been silenced, buried, or burned. A universal archetype of mourning that had taken form, demanding to be heard, demanding not to be forgotten. Asterisk. Today, villagers near Lake Ladoga still report strange phenomena during winter solstice. Lights flickering in abandoned monasteries, children waking from dreams of wooden faces, whispers in old birch forests saying, "Mama's here." One eyewitness, a lumber worker named Alexei Petrov, described seeing a woman standing by the tree line during a snowstorm, cradling something small. He thought it was a child, until he saw the cracks in her face, the lacquer glistening beneath her skin. When he blinked, she was gone. But in the snow where she'd stood, he found a small wooden doll, blank and unpainted. He brought it home. By morning, It had 6 layers. Asterisk. This is how hauntings survive, not through blood, but through attention. Each retelling, each fascination, gives them form. And perhaps that is the true curse of the Matryoshka, that it does not need to exist physically anymore. It exists in thought, in memory, in every word that keeps her story alive. Every time someone whispers, "The ghost inside the Matryoshka," the layers deepen. You add one more, you become one more. Asterisk. Some say the doll now resides in a private collection in Vienna, sealed behind glass. Visitors claim the smallest layer glows faintly when looked at too long. Others insist it's gone completely, that it burned with the Morozov footage, leaving only ash. But those who have touched its ashes dream the same dream. They stand before a vast wooden woman, her face carved from grief itself. She bends down, smiling with a mouth that does not end, and whispers, "Welcome home, my child." Then the dreamer wakes and finds a small flake of red paint beneath their pillow. Asterisk. In the end, the story of Russia's haunted doll is not about ghosts at all. It is about remembrance and the danger of giving memory a body. Because when pain is preserved too perfectly, it begins to want things. It begins to move. It begins to call your name. And one day, perhaps soon, someone will find a small, unpainted Matryoshka resting in an attic, a museum, or beneath their grandmother's floorboards. They will lift it, curious, and feel a warmth in the palm of their hand, like a heartbeat. They will open it, then another, and another, until the final layer rests in their trembling fingers, small, pale, weightless. They will bring it close to their ear, and hear a voice whisper from inside, "Now you are part of me." Silence. Then one final sound. Knock. Knock. Asterisk. The ghost inside the Matryoshka has no ending. It is inside all who remember her, and every time her story is told, the doll opens again. Asterisk.